Now, when Jinqi and I, I'm just pressing a continue button on a recording. When Jinqi and I started this research late last year, we were still blissfully oblivious, as I think most of us were, to the possibility, let alone the reality, of the type of far-reaching disruption the tertiary sector would experience and our teaching and our students' learning would be confronted with. So our research isn't really directly linked in the way the other two are to the pandemic, but I did want to sort of tease out two key implications for our research before I focus on sort of what we were looking at late last year in a face-to-face environment. And that was that the pandemic has really underscored how critical it is that the tertiary educators and institutions continue to innovate learning experiences that we offer our students. The pandemic has really shown how far-reaching the changes to our labour markets can be, to the very fundamentals of how we ourselves do work, let alone how work is conducted in multiple industries. And we really, it's really highlighted how the tertiary sectors needs to be agile and responsive to that. And the other aspect is it has, in a very nuts and bolts way, changed how we teach. And while we all hope for a return to a face-to-face environment, I think that return is going to look different. And when we tease out some of the challenges that we want to sort of point to in terms of interdisciplinary learning environments, I think the online learning environment has heightened some of those. But then again, it's also produce some really exciting opportunities for fostering deeper and more meaningful interdisciplinary collaboration as well. So those are things that I don't really cover in this presentation, but perhaps that's in the back of our minds or in the forefront of our mind, and something we can speak to a little bit later. But at this stage, I really just want to focus on presenting our preliminary findings for a primary research study we undertook in semester 2 last year, where we were really wanting to explore teacher and student experiences of interdisciplinary learning. So I'll just see if I can drive my PowerPoint. Oh, what was that sound? Okay. So I'll begin by providing you with a little bit of context. Jinqi and I are part of an interdisciplinary teaching team, and we're delivering a relatively new suite of units called Industry and Community Project units at the University of Sydney. And these were launched, I think, in 2018. We came on board in 2019, and each run our own individual projects within these. And this is sort of the first time that the institution has made room for literally students from every corner of campus to join in a shared classroom. The projects aim to bring a real-world complex problem provided by an industry partner to an interdisciplinary cohort. And the idea is that interdisciplinary research and collaboration is best placed to deal with the complexity we're confronted with in the real world. Complex problems, according to the National Academy of Science, include any inquiry related to nature and society, with the undertaking that these are inherently complex, problems at the interface of disciplines, societal problems, and problems relating to generative technologies. But the form that this interdisciplinarity should take and the mechanics of this are somewhat debated. There's a wealth of literature that explores what we actually mean by interdisciplinarity. And there's some different typologies around this, including ones that look at cross-disciplinarity and intradisciplinarity, where we're talking about like disciplines collaborating together. I want to just speak to a quite common typology here from Kiestra and Mencken that really signals or highlights three key branches. And this is for interdisciplinarity to be present across each of these three categories, more than one discipline must be involved. In the case of multidisciplinary collaboration, however, while these disciplines need to be present, they don't need to integrate. In the context of interdisciplinarity, we're looking at integration across theory, methods, concepts, perspectives, data. And in the context of transdisciplinary learning, again, that kind of interdisciplinary integration, but also the engagement of non-academic knowledge as well. And so those are very different undertakings. And there's a wealth of literature, educational literature, that also starts to or tries to explore the mechanics of this. I don't know what that noise is, but anyway, it reminds me. Okay, there we go. So by this typology, I think in a sense, the curriculum that we're working in aspires to be to produce a transdisciplinary learning environment. This is an example of a project that I'm delivering this semester. We had a complex problem on commercial waste brought by our industry partner, the City of Sydney. Commercial waste, entailing everything from the state and federal legal environment, the science of waste, as well as behavioural aspects of individual consumption and waste practices. I have a class of 45 students ranging from all those sort of majors that you see there in that word cloud. This is getting, maths, biology, animal health, international relations, speaking together, and I throw them into 9 groups as diverse as possible. But as the literature tells us, this always skips across one, to achieve transdisciplinary collaboration involves more than just having the presence of these disciplines or these multiple disciplines. We need to get them into interaction, and for that to happen, a number of things need to take place. For example, we know that integration is essential, whether through melding concepts, methods, or sources of evidence. We know that mutual learning is really integral for that integration to occur. And we know that peer and faculty mentoring can have a really important role in fostering and facilitating. There we go, and fostering and facilitating that mutual learning. In our ICPUs, we've approached trying to achieve those ingredients by scaffolding key concepts to make that diversity accessible to students, facilitating cross-group peer mentoring, facilitating mentoring from the industry partner to bring in those non-academic and sometimes academic sources of knowledge, and providing supervision of autonomous group work. But do we know if transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary learning is occurring? And in fact, Keistra and Mencken say that often in one single research project, those different types of interdisciplinary learning, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, can be mobilised for different parts of the research or at different stages of the research process. Okay, so there's a wealth of literature that exposes the forms of interdisciplinary collaboration and articulates opportunities and blockages for achieving this. But what we really wanted to contribute is more on the how, and how is this experienced and what kind of learning is actually produced. So to really provide some grounded qualitative data that teases out some of the mechanics that the literature talks about, and perhaps reveals some, produces some insights that we're not aware of as well. So we decided to do a short pilot study, which would serve as a basis. Sorry, I'm just operating my Zoom here and getting more on the screen. That would serve as a basis for further interventions and also allow us to refine our methods for a more comprehensive study down the track. And this includes the feature of a collaborative autoethnography, where we're mining our own experiences through periodic individual and collaborative reflective journaling in our semester, as well as undertaking some of the reflective journaling with the students as well. And we had 3 projects that we recruited from and had 37% participation across those 3 projects, though unfortunately minimal participation in one of those project groups. Now, if we look at some of reflections, our own reflections. Early on, we reflected on our expectations for our role in the classroom in order to facilitate interdisciplinary learning. What I think was interesting here is that we both not only emphasised the interaction of different disciplines, but we expected the diversity in student groups to be constituted by broader factors such as experience, culture, and personal life. And in fact, this broader framework of heterogeneity and diversity in group work, I think, is a really important complementary literature that our own reflection points to, and that some of our findings point to, because there's some literature that also shows that we do need to, that students experience group work in the context of diversity in a very different way, and it can produce heightened levels of anxiety as well. So that was something that was interesting to note at that point. By the mid-semester, we had recognised that there were some challenges to our sort of ability to facilitate transdisciplinary learning in our classrooms. And here, really, the focus shifted to disciplines. In 2 classes, we found that we were dealing with more of an interdisciplinary mix. So beyond our control, certain projects attracted disciplines within a particular area, economics and business, or, you know, vet and animal studies, or science students. So students would gravitate to certain projects. And we were dealing with more of that interdisciplinary mix, and students would make that observation as well and have concerns about that. In this word cloud here for one of the groups, there are still all of these different types of disciplines present: history, geography, political economy, but across the group formations, there was a dominance of like disciplines within the groups. And that was something we needed to manage. That, and the fact that intrapersonal relationships, irrespective of this added level of diversity, remained a key challenge for students and for us in trying to support our students as well. So being mindful of the time as well, I'll move to looking at some of the student reflections. Now, with the students, we asked them, we set some reflective tasks, because reflection is a key part of how we deliver this curriculum as well, at the beginning, the mid and the end of the semester, and right at the, and gave them an opportunity at each of those points to reflect on how their understanding of interdisciplinary learning was changing. And so there was one quantitative question that allowed them to rate this over time. And you can see that over time, in terms of their self-reported understanding of interdisciplinary learning, whether that baseline across students was, you know, offers a good comparative point, we do see that that is moving upward. So their self-perceived understanding of interdisciplinary learning was growing. However, there were some other things we asked them about that I think help to unpack these numbers a little bit. So we did ask them at each point about their understanding of their disciplinary affiliation, their understanding of interdisciplinary collaboration, and their understanding of barriers to interdisciplinary collaboration as well. Over time, it was clear that they were attaining a deeper sense of their disciplinary identity. So in that black circle there, yep, I'll probably go a couple of minutes over time, but in that black circle there, at that baseline first point of reflection, they tended to describe the disciplinary affiliation in terms of the subject area, in terms of the knowledge that they were gaining through that inquiry in terms of discrete technical skills. But over time, they started from reflection 2 and 3 to point at philosophical insights about what their discipline, how their discipline was scaffolded. They had a relational sense of what their discipline was compared to another, and it related to that limitations and biases that their discipline might produce, and the ways in which their discipline was methodologically different to others. So Helen, for example, stated, "My understanding of my disciplinary affiliation has slightly changed. I've realised that within the science discipline, quantitative research is strongly emphasised." And Anna spoke, "Being with people from different disciplines makes you really realise things about your own disciplines, preconceptions, approaches and ways of thinking you may harbour without being conscious of it. For example, I realised that law is more rigid than I originally thought, and it has a very specific way of approaching problems." If we looked at barriers to interdisciplinary collaboration, this also became more nuanced. So initially there was a real concern about disciplinary hierarchy and generally about communication channels and teams. But that then became extended as well to recognising that there might be very different philosophical premises of different disciplinary lenses, methodological differences that may be difficult to navigate, motivational differences, so different interests, and also in terms of communication, that disciplinary jargon in itself might create barriers for working across disciplines. Mina spoke, "Prior to this project, I have mainly collaborated with students from other scientific disciplines during group work. Consequently, when I first started this course, I was greatly surprised upon discovering just how disparate the ways of thinking and approach are between students. And then Amina, my understanding of key barriers to students from different disciplines working together has changed. Since everyone is used to a certain methodology and of doing things in a certain way, it can be hard to find a way of doing things that works for everyone. And then finally, in terms of understanding of interdisciplinarity, in the beginning, the emphasis was very much on this is about disciplines, different disciplines collaborating or being present to solve a problem. But they hadn't really spoken to some of that mechanics. And increasingly, a really big theme that emerged was that of learning from others, and to a lesser extent, that of non-disciplinary experience and integration. Anna, I used to think that it was just having a team of people from different disciplines, but now I understand there's much more than that. It is all about combining and collaborating to solve a problem from a unique perspective that would have not been possible with one discipline alone. And Helen, I've realised that interdisciplinary learning does not only involve gaining specialised knowledge in different areas, but also appreciating different methods of inquiry as well as the academic and life experiences of individual group members. So just to conclude, we're still sort of refining this and finalising this as we go. But I think, some initial insights we have is that this growth of disciplinary and identity and disciplinary depth really holds hands with emerging interdisciplinary, I want to say conscientization, but it's a word I just cannot say, but I tried it anyway because it's the right one. While there's some limited identity of synthesis and integration, that real scaffold that's required for that, which is learning from others, is really present and something that is growing. Though I think in terms of our transdisciplinary aspirations, how we tackle and bring in non-academic knowledge is something that as teachers and students we're also still coming to terms with. Anyway, I'll leave it there because I know I went a little bit over what I thought I would, and welcome your questions.
Yes, sorry. I had to pause you midway. I'm very sorry about that. Just because there was a weird sound coming through. So I just had to mute everyone. So if you do want to speak or want to say anything out loud, I have to manually unmute you. So just raise your hand or put it in the chat and we'll try to do it that way. I'm very sorry, Elisabeth, for throwing you in there. And so I'll just get up to unmute you again. Okay, there you go. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask Elisabeth or Jinqi? You have a few minutes. Good. Okay, very good. If there's no further questions, what I might do move on to Alexa, so I'll unmute you now in a second. Okay, Alexa, you should have the floor.
Thank you. And I might have a question for Elisabeth later and Jinqi, so we'll come back to it, I'm sure. Thanks very much, Sarah. Before I begin, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land from which I present, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and to recognise their elders, past, present and emerging, and to pay my respects to any Indigenous Australians who are attending this session with us today. This piece is an autoethnography, and I've decided not to use a PowerPoint, so I'm going completely old school. So you just have me talking about my life. And it's at the moment, it's more auto than ethnography. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with autoethnographies, but it's more about my own personal experience pre-COVID and post-COVID, juggling motherhood and academic interests. And I'll be sort of building on this piece. It's definitely a work in progress, building on this piece and embedding more academic work into it, into the future. But for now, it's a little bit of a story. So this is story time. Have a cup of tea and sit back, and I hope you enjoy. There it was, a heartbeat. There was no doubting it. On the screen, we saw it flickering, a baby, the size of a pea. Lying, legs spread-eagled in the obstetrician's office in Vienna, my head swirls. I had expected that at my age, being 35, almost 36, that pregnancy would not come easily, and certainly not instantly. After all, I had been warned. There were all those times that I had gone for a pap smear and left with unsolicited fertility advice from well-meaning Australian doctors. All of those doctors who were so confident that pregnancy would be, for me, an uphill battle. So I must tell you that at your age, it'll probably take at least 6 months to conceive, the doctor says, leaning forward, staring at me straight in the eye, her expression serious. I'm about to start a PhD in Hong Kong, I respond. That's my priority at the moment. PhDs can be done anytime, she counters. Children, on the other hand. At that moment, neither she nor I could have ever guessed that the universe would have very different plans for me. So I had believed all those doctors wholeheartedly. They were the medical professionals after all. And so in planning the future of our family, I had factored in 6 months of trying. And it was those 6 months which I intended to use to move considerably closer to completing my PhD. I thought quick pregnancies only really happen when you are young, I say to the Viennese obstetrician as she writes out the next steps we need to take. She laughs, smiles at me. You're not old, she says. Now make sure you limit yourself to 2 espressos a day. And by 2, I mean 2 in the whole day, not 2 at a time. On the way home to the little flat we are subletting, my husband at my side, I think of my thesis. I've written 1 full chapter, the methodology, and am midway through another. Both still need to be reviewed by my supervisors. I try to work out the timing of how to get to the finish line before the birth, but my head is muddled and I keep miscalculating the dates. While half of me is completely thrilled at the prospect of motherhood, the other half is petrified that my PhD may come to nothing. It is late November and the air has an icy chill and snow is beginning to flicker down. Winter has come early to Vienna and we are blessed to be here for the Christmas markets. I'm in love with the little market stalls, their roofs blanketed by snow, their vendors selling mugs of steaming hot drinks. It is just all so completely beautiful and romantic and magical, like out of a fairy tale. But the chill makes its way through the broken soles of my leather boots, and I can only stomach avocado sushi rolls. I am just so cold, so bitterly, painfully cold, so totally fatigued, and so worried about all I need to achieve. I yearn for home. I yearn for Australia. We returned to Canberra just before Christmas, and battling horrendous jet lag combined with morning sickness, I somehow summons the energy to visit the local doctor. I am 12 weeks pregnant now, and I know that a very important scan is due. We are referred to a clinic on the other side of town, and on a dry, hot Canberran day, we make our way there, the air thick with the smell of dried eucalyptus leaves. I take my laptop with me, ambitiously hoping to write in the waiting room. Instead, it ends up sitting, lid closed, on my lap, precariously balanced on my sweaty legs as they jiggle away nervously in fear of what the scan may or may not discover. As the scanner starts making its rounds on my belly, I catch a glimpse of a strange expression on the sonographer's face. My heart stops. Was that confusion? Concern? I cross my fingers together painfully tight and I pray. Is everything okay? Are you aware, she asks, her hands scanning in rapid, determined movements, that you're carrying multiples? Oh, no, I say. Oh, you're incorrect. There was 1 heartbeat. We saw it flickering on the screen, a baby the size of a pea. Well, there's more than 1 now, she replies. More than 1? How many? Let me check. Definitely 2, but I should make sure there's not a 3rd. Not 1 little pea, but 2 twins. By the time the 2nd trimester arrives, I've received the good fortune of a joyous twin pregnancy. I become one of those annoyingly blissed out women who floats about in her maternity wear, beaming rays of light and speaking about how much she loves her burgeoning belly. Now back in Melbourne for my husband's work, I have limited myself to 1 espresso a day, but I put no limitations on the number of croissants I consume. Each day I write and the thesis appears on track. This is going well, I tell myself. I start to imagine the future, how I will still write after their birth, 2 babies sleeping peacefully and bassinets beside me as I calmly type away, energized by cups of chamomile tea. Then the 3rd trimester arrives. I hit a roadblock of a chapter and become increasingly paranoid that the babies may come early. Twins are high risk for prematurity, and so I start to spend long periods of time lying horizontal in the hope that this will keep them in for longer. My writing pace slows. The problematic chapter is at a standstill. All illusions are replaced with the reality of the many important responsibilities I now carry. My knees are buckling under the strain of the weight of a high-risk pregnancy and the high risk of an incomplete thesis. The babies arrive, entering the world through planned C-section, Charlie Ascot and Vienna Thelia, Ridgway done. 37 weeks gestation to the day, full-term twins, birthed 1 minute apart, 2.7 and 2.5 kilos respectively. Congratulations, all the doctors say. This is a twin pregnancy success. Yet it hovers, the knowledge of what I am yet to birth, the work I've committed the last 4 years to, which is yet to come to fruition. As the days and weeks pass, I realise just how quickly you can lose every part of yourself in the journey of motherhood, every sense of yourself. The babies are thriving, but I am falling apart emotionally, physically, psychologically, spiritually. I'm a complete emotional wreck, and my husband is trying to support me through this utter madness of caring for 2 newborns at once who don't sleep and who continuously feed. I cannot bear to be apart from them, but I know that this is the only way that the thesis will have any chance of completion. And so my husband starts taking them for daily walks, and the writing begins once more. This is the way that my thesis crawls along. I drag myself, sleep deprived, through the revisions of chapters in these precious 1-hour periods. Other times I sit on the twin feeding pillow, a baby at each breast, small table over my crossed legs, and then I carefully tap, tap, tap away at my chapters, making sure I do not wake the babies from the only place that they soundly sleep. Slowly, 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 I move the thesis forward. Slowly, 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 a word or 2 at a time. And surprising even myself, I finish. But the difficulties in doing so have made me question how realistic my hopes are of holding on to any part of my former academic life while being a twin mum. Some opportunities give me faith. I'm provided with a carer's bursary to attend the TASA conference in Sydney, and so I take the twins there with me on an epic road trip, my mother coming along to help with their care. It's a crazy wild ride, but we have the most wonderful time. My hope for keeping my academic pursuits alive is restored. But other experiences lead me to think that the academic world is not a place for women who are mothers, even those with a thesis under their belt. It's a hot day and I've spent the night before preparing, putting together bottles and nappy bags and choosing a breastfeeding friendly outfit that does not consist of leggings and a baggy t-shirt. The car is jammed with a twin pram the size of a bus and about 10 shopping bags full of baby-related paraphernalia. All those things that we need, just in case. Hi, says Lisa, clambering into the car. Look at you go, twin mama, you bloody amazing woman. I can't believe we're doing this. Hopefully we get there in one piece, comes my nervous reply. She swoons over the babies in their capsules as I look at my phone. Now, Google Maps tells me it takes 1 hour to get to the university, I tell her, and the map shows a car park right next to the building where the seminar is. Perfect, says Lisa, buckling in. Thank God for Lisa, I think. My lovely friend who wants to support me to attend a seminar at a university on a topic directly related to my field. A week prior, I'd sent an email to the seminar organisers asking for the possibility to Skype or for the presentation to be recorded. Sorry, comes the response. We don't have that type of technology available, and the presenter doesn't want to be recorded. 6 months later, with the arrival of the COVID shutdown, the very same research network will somehow find the technological capacity to make Zoom their modus operandi overnight. And the very same academic will present on Zoom and have it recorded. In the mad Melbourne traffic, it takes 2 hours, not 1, to get to the campus, and we end up late. The car park is for staff only, and so, driven by desperation, I park illegally. Lisa is left with the babies in the pram and the million of bags of supplies, and I make a bolt for it. I make it just in time for the last half hour of the presentation. Entering the room, I do a quick twin mum environmental scan. The door is very heavy to push and would be impossible to do one-handed. And anyway, the room is too tight for my gigantic twin pram to enter. The audience sits quietly. I receive no friendly smiles upon arrival. You could hear a pin drop here. A baby's cry would shatter this serious silence. There are no spare chairs around the large U-shaped table which has been set up for the presentation, and so I end up wedged in a corner at the back of the room with a number of other latecomers. I think back to the end of the email I received the week prior when I RSVP'd. We want to support academic mothers, they wrote. Bring your beautiful babies. But my beautiful 3-month-old babies have no place here. The room may be filled with women, but it is not designed for women like me with babies like mine. I look out the window and I see Lisa on the grass below with the 2 bassinets, rocking them under the shade of a large tree. And it is in that moment that I let go of any hope I had of remaining a part of the academic community. This is the story of me a year ago. And in 12 months, so much has changed. I now feel like I actually have a place in academic circles, even though I remain the primary care of twins who are now toddlers. In 2020, I've been able to attend seminars weekly online and participate in discussions from the comfort of our home. Sometimes this is with a child or 2 on my lap. Sometimes I listen in while walking home from the shops with my twin pram that is still the size of a bus. Sometimes I feed the twins lunch while I jump in and out of conversations, typing in my comments in between the mouthfuls of food I feed them. Many of these opportunities have actually come through TASA, but other academic institutions and organisations have also stepped forward and created online platforms for discussion and engagement. In addition to attending forums and conferences, I've also been able to present at them. My husband, who now works from home, can step in for an hour or so while I present. He can make up the lost work time in the morning or the afternoons when he would normally commute. In fact, some of these conferences have actually been overseas. Because of the time difference, I can present late at night or early in the morning as he cares for the children. I've even been able to undertake some research assistant work, which I completed in the evenings and on weekends, as I could do it remotely and flexibly. In 2020, beyond all of my expectations, I've been able to juggle twin motherhood and remain involved in the academic conversations which I cherish. But my ability to remain in the world of academia is, unfortunately, not due to a feminist awakening of the academy. No, it is the result of a health crisis of epic proportions, a pandemic sweeping the globe, a virus which has brought the world to its knees. The way in which academia has had to respond to lockdown measures has revealed the unnecessary exclusivity of traditional forms of engagement, which was restricted to university campuses and in-person participation. Yet, in spite of all these positive changes, I do worry. As lockdown measures ease, there is a risk we will return to the inflexibility of the past. That once again, I and others in similar circumstances will find ourselves outside of these academic conversations, reading adverts to research seminars that we cannot possibly attend. I truly hope this is not the case. My presentation is thus really a call for us to hold on to what we've actually achieved in 2020. Is a call for us to not let go of this virtual academic world that we have created, which allows for greater accessibility than ever before. It is a call for us to keep the door open on this virtual room through which more academic parents can enter, no matter their personal circumstances, including the nature of their caring responsibilities. This is an online academic world which has become a place where primary care parents have greater opportunities to have seats at the virtual table. where we can listen in to current scholarly discussions and stay abreast of research trends, where we have the opportunity to contribute from our own research as well as from our own experiences, where we have a place and a voice in the conversation. These online spaces have actually welcomed us in practice rather than just in principle. And so while they may have started as a short-term measure, it is vital that they become part of the status quo. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Alexa. That was wonderful. And as someone who loves audiobooks and who's also a twin, actually, I feel for you on many, many occasions. So thank you. We have a few minutes. Does anyone have any direct questions they'd like to ask Alexa before we move on to the final presentation, which is my own? And we obviously we do have time at the end if anyone wants to have a general discussion about anything, but thank you very much. Okay, so what I'm going to do, Alexa, if you wouldn't mind, thank you, Jinqi, very much for your presentation earlier. I will share my screen, and if you wouldn't mind giving me a warning, maybe I'll probably take the full 15, if not a few extra minutes. So you can just let me know when we hit 15 minutes. That'd be great. Okay, so to start, in January of this year, I moved to the island of Newfoundland to begin the 8 months what was going to be my ethnographic research fieldwork on the island. I moved to Newfoundland. I was exploring the question of belonging and home, mainly among settled Syrian refugees within Newfoundland and Canada. And so coming to Newfoundland and the island for about 8 months, I had planned to embed myself in the daily life of the island, undertake a participant observation, and what I call extreme volunteerism. So basically immerse myself in all the different places and spaces and, of intercultural encounters where I could both observe and meet people. Along with this, I also plan to undertake participatory mapping with participants on the island and really get to know the people and the place. So as a place, the island of Newfoundland is, Newfoundland and Labrador is formerly a province in the northeast coast of Canada. However, due to the geographic scale and the proximity, as well as the cultural dynamics and the settlement story in Newfoundland, I focused just mainly on the island portion. To give you context, Newfoundland is actually over 400 square kilometers in size with just 500,000 people. So to give you context, Tasmania it's about 7 times the size of Tasmania with the same number of people. So it's quite a dispersed population of people, and about 40% of those 500,000 people live in the capital of St. John's. So it's a place characterized by rugged coastlines and a history of living off the land. It has very deep Aboriginal history, as well as historical ties to England and to Ireland that dates back to the 1400s. Newfoundland as a place is a really uniquely situated in that it has a series of complex identities, both where it sees itself in the global world, but also with Canada. And so migration to the island has always been an interesting story. Historically, Newfoundland has received a large number of refugees in the past. However, it hasn't been able to retain very many people. It has less than 1% cultural diversity, and so it's largely homogenous. So when I went to the island, I was planning on kind of going to all these places where there's transforming the spaces of intercultural encounters where refugee settlement is becoming really pronounced. Since 2015, there's been over 250 Syrian families that have settled in Newfoundland and call it their home. And so it's really changing the dynamic and the picture of what the island looks like. However, when I got there, we can all agree that this year hasn't gone as planned originally. So for me, that actually started the very first week I landed in Newfoundland. They had the largest snowstorm that the island had ever seen in over 150 years. So we actually had a state of emergency declared my first week in the island that lasted about a week due to snowstorm. And people in St. John's weren't actually allowed to leave their homes for about 6 days while they cleared the aftermath of this epic snowstorm. I had a presentation for the university there, Memorial University, that actually got canceled 3 times due to different snowstorms before anything even happened in March. So by the time we got to March, I had experienced about 4 snowstorms, cancellations of appointments and interviews, all sorts of hurdles. And then my very final, the 4th attempt of presenting at the university landed the week that COVID became declared a public health emergency. So to say that my research faced some hurdles was a bit of an understatement in the beginning. It just kind of added to whatever I was going. But then of course we come to March, and I don't need to tell you what happened. And I found myself in this state of flux, you know, geez, like, what do I do? Do I just pack up and go home back to Australia? Do I call it? Do I wait out the pandemic and see what happens? And, you know, so rather than going into the emotional turmoil, that was the first 4 weeks of COVID lockdown, where I baked a lot of bread and I germinated seeds and I went for lots of runs in the country, I started actually beginning to think more methodically, okay, well, I'm here in this place where I'm meant to be in public spaces of intercultural encounters. That can't happen. I'm meant to be doing these interviews in people's homes, and that can't happen. You know, what do I do? And so once I realized that we're going to be in this situation for months and not weeks, I started thinking about my research and how I might progress, or if I might progress. And so I think when you find yourself in this situation that's totally unexpected, and your methods no longer work, you need to completely rethink your field work. You know, what do you do? And so I think actually what I ended up undertaking was a bit of reflective research in the field that I think is actually really helpful for anyone when they come across a situation when they're doing ethnographic fieldwork, or even fieldwork overseas, or even just locally, when you're forced to kind of rethink, reflect, and adapt your research process. And so the first thing that I did was, effectively, I read the room. And so that's noting the effective atmosphere of the place you're living in. So are you in the right place to conduct your research? What about your participants? What is the situation like? And is it the right time to get your data collected to even start? So for me, the first 4 weeks of the pandemic were absolute no-go. People were stressed, people were confused, you know, people were adapting the work to go online, some people were losing work, and it wasn't the time to be asking people to participate in my research. So when it was, however, was maybe about a month or 2 in, when I started having informal conversations with community stakeholders and lead members of the community, and I started asking people if they had an appetite for participating in my research if it went online, and what that could look like. And so once things settled down, I was able to gauge that better. And I think this is important to do at any stage of the fieldwork, whether or not when you're involving human participants, because it's really important to kind of know what the societal situation is and the atmosphere at the time. I also thought about my research question. So what things could change, what couldn't change? So what was I willing to compromise on, and what couldn't be compromised? And for me, my research question was central and core, and what was also important is involving human beings and their narratives. So making sure that their stories were still being heard. So that was something I couldn't change, but potentially how I collected those stories could. So I started to explore different processes and things that were being done. I attended lots of webinars, and there was a heap of things that were actually being offered at that time to help sociologists and people in the field actually adapt and think about online qualitative methods. So the timing actually worked well globally for me to get the support that I needed. And so I started thinking and exploring and looking at research that was out there on ways to take fieldwork online. And that actually forced me to be more creative. So because I thought, okay, maybe I can take these stories and interview people online, but how I might involve them in the research and still participate was something that I was thinking that I had to adapt to. So I started thinking about creative ways that people have done participatory research. And so I applied photo elicitation in the interviews I was doing online. So I allowed participants to share photos of their choice, either before moving to the island and since moving to the island, of things that were important to them. And that really guided the direction of the conversations that we had. And it also helped bridge a lot of the virtual space. That's something I'll kind of get to just in a minute. But so thinking creatively about how I could get these stories and how I could adapt my methods online was something that this time forced me to do. And lastly was, also thinking ethically. So not just adapting my ethics application, which I did, but also thinking, what's the best thing for my participants, and thinking about if I'm going to revise my methods, what's the way that I could do it and make sure that they're supported as well. Now, facing challenges, of course, moving online wasn't all hunky-dory. There are obviously challenges in changing your methods when you're in the middle of the field. So for me, you know, losing that ability to be in the physical place and space was really difficult at first, because that was where I was doing a lot of my networking and my building of relationships. I also, Ramadan celebrations were canceled for a lot of my participants. That was really impactful, because that was a really significant part of their presence on the island. So there was those losses that, you know, I had to kind of relate to. But in losing the physical relationship building, I was actually moving to the online space was something that kind of was able to help support some relationships to build. So I attended a lot of online language classes and social things that were being offered by settlement agencies. I did anything that was online that would connect me to the local community I went to. And that actually supported a lot of relationships to build, which was surprising and also lovely in itself. I also was able to build on piggyback off of some of the relationships I built in person before the COVID lockdown happened. And so reaching out to those people virtually at a later date wasn't weird or foreign. It was, they were very familiar with who I was, and they had seen me around. So having that little bit of physical time was helpful. And there was also the challenge of online saturation. People were tired of Zoom and tired of things online, so I had to kind of be cognizant of that. I didn't want to add to that noise or that frustration some people started feeling, particularly later in the piece. And so being conscious of Zoom fatigue and the different ways people did it. And of course, the technological challenges when you move online, you have things like we had today, a good example, you know, glitches where, you know, you're sending communication to space and back, you know, time lapses, things drop. And when you're recording those interviews and those conversations, that can be really challenging. But rather than kind of go on to all the things that went wrong while I was overseas and the challenges of going online, I found a lot of things through my research process that I wouldn't have discovered had I stuck to what I would plan to do from the get-go. One thing that really surprised me was that actually online qualitative research can be done, and it actually can yield some really interesting conversations and some really great results. Privacy can be more easily protected for some people, so you can be invited into people's homes without invading that space physically. So that physical invasion of space, when you're doing interviews or going in person, didn't happen in the online world. And one participant actually chose to turn his camera off for our conversation because he wanted to smoke, and he feels uncomfortable doing that in front of people, but it helps him think. And it made him more comfortable actually having the camera off while he was smoking, because he could talk about some things that were a bit more difficult, but he had that privacy that he needed. Also addressing spatial barriers of access. So people who live more regionally, rural, or remote, people who, as Alexa pointed out, had issues with family, that doing virtual interviews actually made it easier. I didn't have issues of funding. I didn't need to rent a car or to get a plane and fly somewhere to see people. I could do that without the financial resources that required. Of course, there's spatial barriers worked the other way as well, but one thing that I found that doing visuals helped to bridge some of that virtual divide. So because we couldn't be in person, inviting people to share photos that they thought were important to them, that could share their stories of home, helped to actually bridge some of that disconnect we had from being on the computer. One example is, these are some photos that a participant shared with me, and we developed a really great relationship with this particular participant, to the point where when lockdown ceased and the end of my research, I was actually able to visit them in person in their home. You know, so we were able to build this relationship, but a lot of that was through the photos that this person shared with me. And they even said, you know, photos help you talk much, and really loved that part of our conversation. And it was registered as a highlight. But conveying the different relationship between home and place, in this case, he shared a photo of his family's home back in Syria that had been bombed. And in contrast, the home that he was living in now, where he found a sense of belonging and sense of peace with his family and all the adventures that came with that. That was really an interesting contrast of the photos this person chose to share with me that led our conversation. Another participant showed, this particular person actually really dictated this conversation by specifically sharing photos from before and then life since moving. So in this case, this is a photo of him working in a factory in Lebanon when he was a refugee. And he said, this is a place where I didn't have a future. I didn't feel like I could live my life. And then this photo, he said, well, this is because I wanted to contrast that earlier photo to show you this is where I have a future. I'm studying to do a university degree now. This is where I can build my future. So having those photos was actually a really wonderful surprise in my process that I wouldn't have included had I not switched to this online world. Now, of course, those photos actually ceased. As soon as people started meeting with me in person, they were happy to show them to me, but I never actually had them tangibly afterwards. So that was one interesting thing, switching from the virtual to the in-person shifted. But I would still argue that taking a blended approach of being able to adapt online and in-person methods actually worked for me the best. So even after lockdown happened, I was so comfortable now with doing online interviews and doing things over the computer, that I was still able to offer that to people who either couldn't meet with me in person, or who lived too far away, or even who didn't feel comfortable yet in doing those in-person conversations. So being able to offer both was actually a really helpful way of moving forward with my research. I found that where you live and the place that you reside matters to people, and even that's just place where they are in time and where they are in their situation. And those relationships that I was able to build mattered, that building relationships doesn't have to happen in person. It can happen online, but still the taking the time to cultivate those relationships and to let them grow was really important, regardless of what happens during the fieldwork. And lastly, the important thing about, I guess, doing my overseas fieldwork during COVID is that it kind of helped me reflect on the fact that this quote I read literally 2 weeks before COVID happened by a local Canadian sociologist, Valiente-Riedl. And he talks about, when you're doing ethnography, your research shouldn't end up where you kind of started. You should be willing to adapt and to move with what happens when you're in the situation. If you go in with a really narrow perception that everything has to stay the way that you originally planned it, you could stay blind to some of the opportunities that come up, or some of the stories that people present, or even what the participants want or what's comfortable for them. And you can kind of neglect a lot of really great things that could come out of the exploratory process of being in the field and doing ethnography. And so, to leave on a positive note, my supervisor said that whatever didn't kill me would make me stronger as a researcher. So any hurdle that I faced while I was away was actually a good thing in building resilience and building more reflection as a PhD student and even into the future. So I'll leave it on that with a picture of my brother skipping rocks, which is all we did for a couple of months. And happy to answer any questions that people might have. So what I'll do is I'll unmute all participants once I stop sharing my screen. And yes, feel free to mute yourself if you wish. Wait. Yeah, okay, that's it for me. So I will end with my presentation. I'll go back to chair hat, comes back on. So thank you everyone for attending. Does anyone have any questions immediately?
I popped one in the chat just then for you, which was to say whether you think your approach to fieldwork has changed. If you had that opportunity again and it wasn't COVID, would there be an online component or option?
Definitely.
Like on what? Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of really great research out there. There's a woman named Alexandra, I can't remember her last name. She did a book on online qualitative methods. It's not a nuanced thing. It's actually been done lots of times in the past using FaceTime and Skype, Zoom, interviews in qualitative research, dating back maybe 9 or 10 years even. And so this is not a nuanced thing, but I think people shied away from doing it. But for me, it was really helpful for those people who couldn't come in, that I'm definitely going to, that I'm definitely going to think about. But I think the other side of it was that even though I will offer it as an option, I think it's really important for people, especially when you're doing interviews. I actually did one when I was in quarantine. Still, I came back to Australia and I was in quarantine, and I couldn't interview this person before I left. And so 11 o'clock at night in the hotel quarantine, I was interviewing someone in Newfoundland. That was great, having that chance to do that. Now I did isolate a number of people that aren't tech savvy and that don't feel comfortable using computers or don't do things online. And so there was a particular community of people that, doing it online wouldn't work and didn't work for them. So when I was able to kind of move into the in-person stuff. But yeah, I think it is something that I am going to barrack for strongly in the future as potential post-COVID world. Yeah.
I loved the visual sociological elements there, and I tried to have a visual component for my thesis as well, and they weren't interested in taking the photos. I think they really wanted just to meet in person, have a cup of coffee, tell their story. So I find it really interesting, your comment regarding how all the photos were very much part of the interaction when it was online, but when it came offline, they were still, I guess, maybe artifacts that we used in the conversation, but they weren't as central. And I wondered too if I had done my interviews online.
It doesn't look either.
Yeah, it was interesting because when I was in person with people, they're happy to take out their phones and their photos that they had chosen.
Your mother.
Them in person. But I couldn't get those photos emailed or texted to me at a later date. So the only thing I had to go on was basically the interviews, my notes from the time that we were doing it, to reflect on, okay, what was that picture of and why did they share that? Rather than be able to go back to that photo and actually have it tangibly. But people were happy to do it in person. Just I never got them emailed to me afterwards. So there was something in that which was interesting. But I love the photo element too. That was something, I'm a very visual person. If you couldn't tell, all the photos are from my time on the island. And so I think pictures say a lot, and pictures help people communicate, especially when language might be an issue.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, twice.
Sorry.
I can't help it.
So would anyone, okay, so I'm going to open up to discussion generally. So Alexa and Elisabeth, you're still here. If anyone has any other questions they'd like to make, Elisabeth, I think you had a question for Alexa before about her presentation. Or no, other way around, Alexa, you had a question for Elisabeth.
I do happen to have one for Alexa anyway. And,
yeah, sure, go ahead.
Mine was, I really loved how you delivered your story. And I've done a little bit of narrative research before and had some, the reviewers struggle with the narrative writing. And so I wondered what, I'm not sure where you're at, have you published your thesis or other works with the narratives included, and what your experience has been of like justifying that and what traction you get?
Yeah, great question. And even when I have sort of presented on my PhD and on my participants' stories, I've used similar styles, and I've been critiqued and told that this isn't a TED talk, right? They've said we loved it, really enjoyed it, not academic. So I think this year I've really engaged with autoethnography, and some people don't feel comfortable with the autoethnography world, but I am completely sold on it as a method. So I think after I completed my thesis, I really needed to do some autoethnography, if you couldn't already tell, because there was such a journey. Not only was I pregnant during my thesis and did I give birth, my father also died. I've written a piece on that recently. I went through a huge amount of biographical disruptions within a very short period while completing my thesis. So after I finished, I really wanted to be able to write like this. And I didn't kind of care where it got published. I just really had the desire to write like this. But then I found the Journal of Autoethnography. I don't know if you know it. It's a new journal, but of course the editors are well known as autoethnographers. And I've currently got a piece under review with them, and I've also done a autoethnography with one of my examiners from my thesis about our experiences of writing while we both have chronic pain conditions. So we've written about writing with pain, and that's currently under review as well. So I'm still waiting to hear back from the reviewers. So I'm happy to let you know how they respond. But because for both of those pieces, I have tailored it towards the autoethnographic world, and obviously will be reviewed by autoethnographers and people who engage with autoethnography. I think that it'll be more open to that. But are you thinking more in terms of a narrative style when looking at your
Yeah.
participants' stories or experiences?
Yeah, I think it's that there seems to be plenty around oral history, narrative
Mhm.
inquiry, autoethnography, collaborative autoethnography about that style of inquiry. But
Yep.
then the latitude you take in presenting as stories, I've
Mhm.
found less on, and there seems to be a little less permission, unless you're in a real niche for presenting in the story form as well. And
Yep.
you know, that's the bit where I think I need to get my head around it a bit more, because the appetite seems to be a little bit different. Yes, take
Yep.
your stories, but then stick with the very academic form of presenting those. And when you present a story within a paper, that's
Yep.
sometimes, not as embraced.
So there's a question here, Alexa, from Ash, asking, she's curious about how much, if at all, do you edit your autoethnographic writing for publication from your notes or journals?
By that, edit in which way, Ash? Do you mind me asking you if you're there?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I'm on my new work computer, and like the mic and the camera are awful. So sorry if you can't hear me very clearly. It's like an upgrade that really is a downgrade. I suppose I mean edit, either like line editing to like make the language, like, I don't know, like sound better, or how much you kind of pull together different parts that you might have kind of written at really different times, but kind of pull them together to, you know, almost to kind of capture the same experience, even if you've written it at different times.
I don't know if this will answer the question, but I guess the way what I presented today was how I normally start this process is I write the personal story out first. And it's quite of a creative writing exercise. And then I come back in. So I haven't done that yet with this piece. So this is very much personal story still. I come back in over the top of it, and then I guess I almost analyze my own work. Does that make sense? So I take the academic analysis of my own piece afterwards, and I separate sections out, and I then embed academic analysis throughout. So I kind of weave that through. That's the editing process that I go through. In saying all of this, I'm not sure how the style, sorry, that's my child in the background, hope you can't hear. I'm not sure how it will go stylistically, because the pieces are still under review. So it'll be interesting to see when I get the reviewers' comments back whether my process requires more finessing, or what they would have expected from it. But I'm not sure yet. I'm still in the dark, I guess.
Yeah, cool, thanks. That's super interesting. That's actually a similar approach that I have taken before. So it's really interesting to hear that that's also what you do, and how you kind of position the narrative versus the analysis bits, and how you put those in dialogue with each other.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that's my model. But I've seen other pieces by I'm forgetting his last name, Jonathan. I'll send it to you later. But where he writes pieces in fragments that he doesn't even really analyze. He sort of has lots of creative fragments. It's kind of left up to the reader to do the analysis. But for me, I feel like I want to take the reader on that analytical journey as well as the journey of the story. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you, Alexa. Now, did you have a question originally, I think, in the beginning for Elisabeth?
I did, and now this is my sleep deprived my brain. I did. Come back to me.
That's all right. Well, this is really interesting, because I think it was a really diverse perspective, and that COVID has its positive and its positive and negative elements to it. Obviously, the negatives is that it's a global pandemic, it's a health crisis. There's lots of all these things that happen from it. People have lost jobs, and there has been really big disruptions in the world. But I think it's important for us moving forward, for resilience and as researchers as well, to look at, okay, well, where can we find those little shining beacons of light or positivity that came from what was a really horrible time, and think about, well, how did this force us to reflect as human beings on how we do things in the future? So for you, Alexa, people were forced to think, well, actually, maybe being more flexible and maybe being more inclusive of new mothers and other people is actually involves reframing our thinking. And so for you, the virtual world actually opened up so many more avenues, and accessibility and the spatial barriers were addressed. Whereas there's also a bit of a challenge for you, Elizabeth, with the in the other side of things. with your interdisciplinary research. And I'm really interested in that typology of the work that you had with Kestra and Mencken, because a little bit of a plug, MEM postgraduate students are doing a seminar on interdisciplinary research in the new year, and I think I may grab you and get your input on that. But does anyone else have anything they'd like to add or about their own reflections with COVID-19 research? Asher, Ramon?
I remember my question, and I'm not sure if you answered it in your presentation, Elisabeth, and I missed it. With your students, you know, they're obviously coming from their own particular discipline, and then they're starting to engage through, you know, and learn from one another. Is there group work here, or are they also undertaking their own assessments? I asked because when I was at University of Hong Kong, there is sort of a general education course that all the students need to do. I taught it. And they all come from different disciplines, but they still tend to, you know, bunch in their own little disciplinary areas. The engineers are here and the lawyers are here. And while in the room, there's that sort of cross-fertilization of ideas and, you know, discussion. They're not collaborating. They don't choose to collaborate across disciplines. So, yeah.
So in our case, it's 70% group work.
Okay.
Or 70 to 80%, depending if it's intensive or in semester model. And they work in groups from week 3, and I create the groups. I engineer.
Ah, okay.
And, I mean, I'm doing some other research around that because when it comes to, you know, group dynamics, there's some literature that shows that students are more comfortable engineering their own groups. And we also have a peer and self-evaluation component, and that can be more uncomfortable in heterogeneous groups as well. So a lot of my education research, which is a piece of what I do, is around, you know, the strengths and limitations of that kind of intervention that can be also more or less disruptive, right? So some of the disciplines that participate in my curriculum are more used to some of those forms of assessments, or, you know, there's more group work based engagement, for example. So they're really forced to work together. But, you know, I'm probably a very interdisciplinary, I have an interdisciplinary background in that I'm a sociologist, an economic sociologist. I've worked in, you know, a range of disciplinary areas with very interdisciplinary cohort within the arts and social sciences. But the ways in which I'm blind to the conventions of an engineer or someone from medicine, you know, it's hard for me to imagine. And so there's such a discovery process for the teacher themselves about how is this landing as an experience for you? What are the invisible types of dominance that are occurring? What interventions can I do and can I not do? Right, so there's you have to really embrace experimentation and a lot of failure, I think, to do it well. And that's, I suppose, where that question emerged of how are they experiencing this? What does this mean? Yeah, so that was answering your question and then taking a detour and going somewhere else.
I love a good detour.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'm not sure if you, Ramon and Ash, you had any final questions or comments you'd like to make before we wrap things up today.
Yeah, well, I was very amazed by all the 3 presentations. I think they were so good, and especially considering this difficult situation that we have today. I think you have done great. Like, I mean, very inspiring. In relation to the first one, Elisabeth, right? Like, I mean, I don't know what your students may think about COVID, because I'm sort of new to this thing, and I can only see it as an interdisciplinary problem. Whatever angle you look at it, it's very difficult to grasp from one single perspective, right? And then now I thought it was more sociological. Now comes the vaccines and all that. So I don't know, like, what your students, I mean, may think about that. Anyway, I've done some previous research on that, and I can see really problems merging between, for example, the economy and biosecurity risks and things like that. I think, yeah. And that was one question. And the other two, can see the benefits of COVID, right? And they almost we have become an abstraction here, talking to like talking heads to the computers, but that has obviously some benefits in terms of barriers that have been down, right? Like you were pointing out, Alexa, right? And the other very creative way of doing that method with the visual method. Actually, I've done some research on self-concept, right? But I didn't ask people to. So I asked my participants to do reflection on their true selves and things like that, right? So they could tell me about a moment that it was expressed and all that. But in my literature, I found a book very recently. I mean, it was an old book that asked sort of the same question, but with pictures. And it was very interesting. I mean, the author kind of makes some argument that shy people, well, there won't be people in the pictures and things like that. But that, I mean, the sort of the different ways in you can understand self-conception, right? And as you probably the connection that you have with that person or those people that send you pictures, etc. I think it's very very interesting and beneficial to some extent to your research. So yeah, I don't know if you have any other comments about this.
Well, thank you very much. I'd be interested to hear that book, actually.
Yeah, I might send you. Yeah, I had it. I might send you the book. Actually, the analysis is not that good, but the features are in the book, so you can.
Yeah. No, that would be interesting. Yeah, I have done some reading about visual prompting with storytelling, and I'm always looking to build on that. So thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you, Ramon, for your comments. They were really thoughtful. And I guess thank you everyone for today. Thank you, Elisabeth and Alexa, for your presentations. And it was really great. So I'm going to close today, let people go about their day. If it's a nice day where you are, as it is here, hopefully get outside, get some fresh air. And thank you. Enjoy the rest of Taza, everybody.